Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video I've got this chart here that goes over every type as well as some other things for every generation, and I'm going to be using this chart in order to pick out my favorite Pokemon of each type and in every generation. And then there's also some special categories down here like favorite pseudo and favorite type or favorite paradox. So yeah, I thought this would be a fun video to do. It's a pretty neat chart that's on GitHub. All you have to do is click in one of the boxes and then it gives you all the Pokemon that belong to the category of the box that you just clicked. So we're going to start out with Generation 1. We got all of the Gen 1 normal types here. And just looking over all of the Gen 1 normal types, I think I'm going to have to give it to Snorlax as my favorite Gen 1 normal type. He's just a big chunky guy. He takes a lot of hits. He eats a berry every once in a while. He's pretty cool. Moving on to fire types. Now, I'm quite partial to the fire type, if you couldn't guess by the name being Fire Farmer 123. But my favorite Gen 1 fire type might have to be between... They're all so good. Arcanine, Ninetales, and Charizard are all such good, like, final evolution fire types. I mean, Ponyta, maybe not so much Magmar. Magmar kind of needs an evolution, and even another evolution at that, but, like, Flareon, Moltres, it makes it a hard pick. I think I'm just gonna have to go Charizard as my favorite Gen 1 fire type. I know it's a pretty basic pick, but, I mean, Charizard's really good. Like, let's be honest here, guys. Going into Gen 1 water types. Now, we have a lot of these guys, and I do like a lot of these Pokemon. Some of them, the more notable ones probably being Slowbro, Lapras, and Gyarados. If I had to give it to Gen 1 water types, I also have to think about, I don't want to reuse Pokemon for certain categories, so I need to plan that out kind of in ahead. Maybe because there's so many water types, we'll come back to this. Grass type Pokemon. I think I'm going to give that one Victory Bell. I think Victory Bell is a really cool Pokemon. It's kind of too bad it hasn't gotten any kind of new forms or anything yet. It's kind of one of those Gen 1 Pokemon that hasn't really been revisited yet, but I think Victory Bell is a very cool idea where it's just kind of the plant that, you know, snaps down like the original Snaptrap Pokemon, that Carnivine. Let's move on to electric types. And electric types, we have the Raichu line with Pikachu. We have I might just pick Zapdos. Zapdos is pretty cool, but so is Electrode. I think just because of its speed, I'm gonna go with Electrode, because Electrode, like, sets screens, he uses Thunder Wave. I mean, all of this isn't necessarily from a competitive aspect, but whether or not a Pokemon is good competitively definitely makes me more fond of that Pokemon, and like its final evolution. So, put Electrode there. Ice types. Ooh, we are a little short on the ice type roster. Articuno was one of those Pokemon that I really liked as a kid, but then as I grew up, I didn't like it as much. Maybe just because there was less Pokemon, and I got to see what more ice types are like. But I think I'm going to put Lapras in that ice type box. Lapras is like the penultimate Gen 1 ice type for me. Alright, going into fighting types. If I was just to grab a fighting type based on how much I like them, I think I would... Ooh, Hitmonlee, though. Hitmonlee's pretty dope. Actually, I think I am going to give this one to Hitmonlee. Kind of coming out of the shadows there, but Hitmonlee's just a really... He just kicks people. How can you go wrong with that? Moving into oh, we got a lot of poison types to think about here. I've already picked the Victory Bell line, and wait, actually, I guess we can just go over to Ghost, and Ghost is just gonna be Gengar, and Dragon's just gonna be Dragonite, because they're the only fully evolved Pokemon on that line. Nothing to the prior evolutions, of course, but, I mean, come on, these guys are cool. Wait, does Dark even have any? Oh, Dark has some other sprites. I guess from these sprites, I just like the Ghost one the most. What's Steel? Oh, Steel's just Magneton. Fairy is, we're getting a little off track here, but Fairy can go to, and this is a hard one between Clefable and Jigglypuff. Not that there's any other options. I think I'm gonna give this one to Clefable though, because Jigglypuff is kind of terrible in main series, but pretty good in Go. But Clefable's like pretty good in Go, and it just has like that mono Fairy / unaware vibes. Also, if I was to give one of these Pokemon a Mega Evolution, it would probably be Clefable. So, that's a good way to think about it, actually. Favorite starter? Ooh, I wouldn't say my favorite starter from this gen's Charizard. From just like a design standpoint, I think I would give it to Blastoise. Blastoise is probably the best starter of this gen. Now let's go back to typings a little bit. Poison. Poison. I like Beedrill from a design standpoint, but it's definitely not that good competitively, and there's definitely their own category for like megas and stuff. So Beedrill is probably just to make Poison. I think I'm gonna give Poison to Tentacruel here, because when I think Poison, out of any, like, I know Muck and Weezing are like literal embodiments of poison, but if I think about a poison type that I would want to draft the most from Gen 1, I guess depending on abilities, Nidoqueen and Nidoking are kind of up there, but poison types from Gen 1, definitely Tentacruel is pretty high up there. What do we have for ground? Ooh, ground is another difficult choice. Ground is either between just Golem or picking Nidoking or Nidoqueen. I think I'm gonna give this one to Nidoking because it didn't make the poison. Never been much of a Golem fan. I like the idea of like regional Golems because like I think a Alolan Golem's pretty neat. I think Golem has a lot of potential. He just doesn't ever do anything really. Also, he's a trait evolution, which means that I never really use him. Flying types. Flying types is a real mixed bag here. I think I'm gonna give flying types to Dodrio. The Dodrio line is pretty neat. I think they're another one, kind of like Victory Bell, one of those evolutionary lines that hasn't gotten a lot of love. But I think there's a lot of potential in like Dodrio. Also, sometimes whenever he uses a Z move, it's pretty funny. So we'll give flying to Dodrio. Psychic types. See, being a Mewtwo stan is kind of a neat idea. I was almost put legendaries in like a different category, but that's hard to do whenever you want to grasp all the types in a generation. I think I'm going to give best psychic type to Slowbro, which then moves it out of being water's type, but best psychic type, he's just pink. He's got a cool mega. He sits on the field for long amounts of times. Slowbro's like a good Pokemon. Bug types. Bug type. I almost want to give it to Pinsir, but we were talking about Beedrill before. I think from a design standpoint, I like Beedrill more than I like Pinsir, but well, I guess Pinsir has a Mega Evolution, and no Pokemon that's... He would need another, like, regional form in order to get another evolution. It's basically just saying I think Pinsir feels not fully evolved, while Beedrill does. So I'll give this to Beedrill. Rock types. I've already talked about Golem. Rhydon. It's okay. Not a Rhyhorn hater, not a Rhyhorn lover, necessarily. I think I'm gonna give Rock to Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl has an underwhelming move pool, but a really cool Mega. I think Aerodactyl is another one of those really simple designs that's just so effective about Gen 1. Okay, coming back to water. So I already made Blastoise the starter for the gen. Tentacruel is poison. Lapras is ice. So I think I'm going to make water Gyarados' slot. Gyarados is such a neat Pokemon for me. Like, I might make a video in the future just talking about how Gyarados has so much potential, like, every generation, no matter what the competitive format is, that it's, like, insane. But, like, basically in every Pokemon game I've ever played, I hunt for shiny Magikarp just so I could get red Gyarados, if red Gyarados isn't in that game. Okay, best Gen 1 gimmick form. Well, we know that there is a lot of them. So gimmick form includes Megas, Gigantamaxes, and that's it. I don't think it's going to be a Gigantamax form, right? Like, if I had to pick one of these, it would probably be the Mega. Mega Gyarados is pretty clutch with that Mold Breaker. Also, just, like, better Gyarados design. It just looks more powerful. But Mega Beedrill is just miles above Beedrill. It makes pretty good use of its limited moveset. I mean, in terms of gimmick, I think I'm going to give this one to Mega Beedrill just because of how much more viable it makes Beedrill as compared to how much more viable Mega Evolution for Gyarados makes Gyarados. Like, Mega Beedrill is just a really good revisit of Beedrill. Favorite legendary. I think this one just has to be Mewtwo. Mewtwo is just the Pokemon at the end of the cave, like level 70 or level 80, that you can use to just sweep through the rest of the end of the game. Such a neat idea to have a Pokemon that's genetically created off of a mythical Pokemon. Like Mewtwo just earns this slot. And finally, the favorite Pokemon of Gen 1. This is hard. I think the best Gen 1 designed Pokemon is probably just Slowbro. Like, he's just like a little slow guy who then gets bit on his tail and he evolves, and then he's got the shell on his tail, and the shell's got a face too. Like, is that really a design that they've replicated at all throughout Pokemon? Like, I feel like it's such a unique idea. Like, you can always have strong fish or plant that captures things, but Slowpoke's idea is just such a unique idea. As well as the fact that, like, they even gave it a Mega Evolution later, that it was such a noteworthy Pokemon. I think Slowbro gets the favorite of Gen 1. Okay, that was rough. Now let's do it again. Gen 2 normal types. This is... I feel like I don't feel too partial against any of these Pokemon, except maybe Furret. Furret's like a good Pokemon, it just hasn't been revisited at all, which is kind of disappointing. But then we have Ursaring, and Ursaring, as we can tell, has like untapped potential. Well, I mean, I guess it was tapped into with Ursaluna, but like, it's kind of weird to think of Ursaring as not a fully evolved Pokemon until you see Ursaluna, and then it's like, oh yeah, he could use another stage. Then you look at Furret, and Furret needs another stage even more than Ursaring did. But Furret is probably... I mean, it's hard to say what Furret would become after Centric goes to Furret. Maybe, like, a normal fighting type would be kind of neat, but feel kind of off-brand for Furret. I think I'm going to give the normal spot to Furret. Furret's just a fluffy little guy, and I love that about Furret. He doesn't need to be too much. He's just enough. Moving on to Gen 2 fire types. I think this one just goes to Entei. Entei, I guess, I know what I said about legendaries before, but Entei is just a really strong legendary Pokemon that I have. Like, I think Entei looks the coolest out of the 3 legendary beasts, and he's just like a fire doggo. Like, nothing against Typhlosion, Houndoom, Magcargo, and Ho-Oh, but I think Entei, as a fire type, is just, like, above these guys. Moving on to water. Water has a lot of good ones here. We have Slowbro's cousin Slowking, who's like, okay. We have Kingdra, who's very powerful. We have Azumarill, we have Feraligatr. You know, actually, speaking of Feraligatr, let's just go over to starter and give that to Feraligatr, because Feraligatr's the coolest one in my opinion. What does Fairy go? Oh, Fairy's just a bunch of little guys, and I guess we'll give this one to Azumarill. Nothing against Gramble, but Azumarill's just kind of Azumarill. Very cool. That's Steel. Oh, Steel's actually kind of a battleground. Steelix, Scizor, and Skarmory. Sorry, Fortress. Steelix is one of those really tanky Pokemon that I see myself grabbing whenever I want to do Earthquake, but Scizor is one of those Pokemon that I feel like you could slot onto a lot of competitive teams really nicely. Relative to Steelix being an evolution of Onix, I think Scizor does a better job at being an evolution of Scyther. Like, that dramatic change between being bug flying to bug steel is done really well with Scizor. And while it's not necessarily done badly with Onix to Steelix, I think I would have liked to see a little bit more change from Steelix in design compared to Onix. And of course, both of these guys have Megas, but I think Mega Steelix is cooler than Mega Scizor, but Mega Scizor obviously is more competitively viable than Mega Steelix. So, it makes it a hard one, but I think I'll put Scizor here. Okay, let's move back over to water, now that I've filtered that out a little bit. Oh wait, does Dragon just Kingdra? Yeah. Okay, that figures that out, never mind. Well, water has been taken up by Feraligatr, Azumarill, and Kingdra have all gotten spots. Let me look at ground for a second. Where's ground? How many ground types do we have? Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give water to Quagsire, just because Quagsire is a funny guy. But going back over to ground, this is a real fight between Steelix and Donphan, just because Donphan might not be super competitively viable, but I have always liked Donphan just for his unique skill set, which is being sturdy and using counter. But in terms of actual ground type Pokemon designs, I think I'll give it to Donphan. Sorry, Steelix. It was a bit of a close race for both of your typings, but I think I'm going to give it to Donphan. Alright, let's head back over to Grass. Grass types... Grass is kind of a race to the bottom. I don't feel super partial about any of these grass types. Like, I guess I'll pick Blossom just because I think Strength Step, Quiver Dance, Giga Drain Blossom is kind of funny. So we'll give it to Blossom. Electric types... either Ampharos or Raikou, really. I think I'll give it to Raikou just because it's a little bit more complicated design. Nothing wrong with Ampharos' design, but Raikou as a Pokemon does a little bit more than Ampharos does. Even though, actually no, I'm gonna change the decision. I think Ampharos here, because I usually use Ampharos as like a Thunder Wave static Pokemon for catching other Pokemons, which makes it really good. And also it has like Cotton Guard defensively, so as an in-game Pokemon, I actually prefer Ampharos more than Raikou whenever I can get my hands on one. Ice types, ooh, another kind of race to the bottom. Just pick Piloswine because he eventually evolves into Mamoswine, which is pretty neat. Fighting, we'll go with Heracross. Heracross, Bug Boy, Mega Evolves. Very cool, very cool. Poison, wow, we're really having a lot of not very close races here. Yeah, let's just go Crobat, just because Crobat is at least cool because it's very fast, and it's a pretty good evolution of Golbat. Whereas with Ariados, I feel like isn't necessarily useless, but it could use, like, a Revisit, just to get some kind of cool move or something else. Flying types. This is a type that we have a lot of. See, this is a difficult one. I think I'm just going to go over to Legendaries, and I'm going to put Lugia as my favorite Legendary from Gen 2. Just because, like, it's kind of, like, Lugia's 3D model isn't that great, but, like, look at this sprite. Like, isn't Lugia just such a powerful ocean bird that can control storms, and it's so neat. Like, don't get me wrong, I like all of the legendary Beasta's designs. I think Lugia as just this raw power storm bird that like flies around but isn't even like a water type or an electric type, it's just neat. What is dark? Is this just Hound? No, we have a good number of dark types. Of course, I guess this is the generation that dark type was introduced, so. See, as a dark type, like, if I was to pick my favorite Pokemon out of these 6, it would probably be Tyranitar, but Houndoom is a really neat concept. Like, Mega Houndoom is a bit of a letdown compared to Mega Tyranitar, but also Mega Tyranitar isn't super good at being a Mega either. What do we have in Rock? Yeah, I think Rock would just go to Tyranitar, and that means that Dark would go to Houndoom. Ghost is literally just Mischievous by default. Bug? Ooh, wait, hold on. Bug. I might be willing to give Scizor Bug instead of Steel, actually. And then I'd be willing to... Sorry, Steelix, I know you're kind of getting this by default, but at least you get some kind of award. Isn't that nice? Please don't be mad at me. But, yeah, compared to the other bug... I mean, we do have Shuckle, and Shuckle's pretty funny. But, Scizor as the penultimate bug type of Gen 2... it's just so neat. Like, if you were to tell me Scizor was designed in, like, Gen 6 or 7, I would believe you, just because of how high quality I think Scizor's design is. Not necessarily that Gen 6 or 7 had designs, it's just that this is a design that I think would take a lot longer, and I wouldn't believe was in one of the earlier generations of Pokemon. Maybe even Gen 4, actually, when they had all those other evolutions. Moving on to Psychic, we have all of the unknown forms and other Psychic types. In terms of Psychic, I'm gonna give it to Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet's a funny Pokemon, just because he counters, he mirror coats, he's in the anime. So if I had to pick a flying design, it would probably be between Skarmory and Mantine. So I haven't had to think about a Mantine in a long time, honestly. I think that's mostly because Mantine just isn't super common in the games, not necessarily because I dislike Mantine, because it's not bad in singles. Like, it's pretty specially tanky, as well as being able to set Tailwind and Roost, I think. So Mantine isn't a bad Pokemon, but Skarmory is also not a bad Pokemon, and it's actually pretty viable in Pokemon Go. So if I was to grab one of these Pokemon, I might grab Mantine because I haven't used Mantine as much, but I think Skarmory is a more reliable flying type. Okay, best gimmick form of Gen 2. Oh no, Gen 2 Pokemon got Gigantamax forms. Huh, I didn't realize. I mean, maybe that'll be something that we see from other gimmick forms. But best Gen 2 Mega? Most of these Pokemon, actually, I think all of these Pokemon have the top of their categories since they changed Steelix's. But if I was to pick the Mega that I think does the most for the Pokemon, not from a competitive standpoint, but from a design standpoint, I think that would be Steelix. So even if Steelix didn't win out in Steel, because Scizor automatically wins out in Bug, I think Mega Steelix would go here anyways. And my favorite Gen 2 Pokemon, I think I would give my favorite Gen 2 Pokemon to Tyranitar. Just because Tyranitar adds a pseudo-legendary, I really like, because he's not a dragon. He doesn't have to be a dragon. I don't know why they keep making them dragons. I mean, I kind of know why they keep making them dragons. It's because the dragon is supposed to be the strongest Pokemon in all of the land. But the fact that Tyranitar is a Rock-Dark type, which is not a super good defensive typing, but it has a really good ability, and it feels like a powerful pseudo-legendary Pokemon of its own right compared to all these other dragons flying around. It's nice to have a pseudo-legendary like Tyranitar that kind of specializes in doing one thing, being just a strong weather setter that has weaknesses, but has a lot of options because of how strong its base stats are. I mean, like, you could run Choice Band, Assault Vest. The Mega's not a bad option if you don't have access to a bunch of other Megas, but I think just Tyranitar overall is a really good utility pick and a really good design Pokemon as well. Alright, Generation 3 normal types. Who do we have here? Who's the most notable one? I think Exploud is definitely up there. I really like Exploud. He's just the guy who yells at the top of his lungs. What's not to love about him? But Zangoose is also a really neat Pokemon. Like, if I was to design a Mega Evolution for one of the Pokemon that's here, it would probably be Zangoose. Or, taking that idea even further, if I was to design a Paradox form of one of the Pokemon that's here, might be Slaking or Vigoroth, but Zangoose would be pretty up there too. So I think from a design standpoint, I'm gonna pick Zangoose. Just because I feel like he has more untapped potential than Exploud, but who knows. Maybe, I think that one could change based on the day. Alright, Gen 3 Fire types. I think we can give this one to Camerupt. Not because I feel super partial about Camerupt, but just because I've never really had an attachment to the other Fire types from Gen 3. Except maybe Torkoal. Torkoal's just the Sunsetter. But I think that's more of a need of necessity rather than wanting to use Torkoal. Water type. Ooh, water has a lot. I think we'll come back to water. Grass type Pokemon. Let me go over to Starter. Because Starter is a hard one between Sceptile and Swampert. But I think when given the option, I'm going to use... I mean, I did use Sceptile for Omega Ruby. So I think I feel a little bit more partial towards Sceptile, which I think it means I might give water to Swampert. Or actually, wait, what's ground looking like? Ground has Flygon though. Okay, let me really think about water types here for a sec. Okay, I've thought about water types and I have decided to give it to Swampert. Just because Swampert as a water type Pokemon whenever it evolves, Swampert's just a neat design. He's got that Mega Evolution as well. But compared to all the other water types here, I feel like what Swampert does really good is being a good final evolution Pokemon. Like, Swampert really does look like the final evolved form of Mudkip. Whereas with some of these evolutionary lines like the Lotad line, I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect to the final evolution. Not to call them out specifically, but you kind of get what I mean. Like, they don't super look like the Pokemon that they're evolving into, except... And I can maybe put Crawdaunt up there, but Crawdaunt doesn't feel like a finished Pokemon either. Even though I think the only thing that holds up Crawdaunt is just adaptability, honestly. Okay, so going back to grass types, I've taken out Sceptile. I think it's going to be Breloom. Breloom is a neat guy, just for that fighting typing. When I look at Breloom, I feel like I see a finished Pokemon, even though he's pretty frail. I mean, it's kind of hard to call Breloom a finished Pokemon, but if they were to give Breloom a Mega Evolution, I could definitely see that. The only thing that really stinks about Breloom is that it's frail and that you get it kinda early, but those could also be good things just because of what its moveset looks like. It kind of plays differently. Okay, Electric type doesn't have a lot, so this is just gonna be Manectric. Never been much of a Plusle or Minun fan, just kind of makes sense to put Manectric here. Ice types. I think I kind of did Walrein dirty. I think Walrein is a really neat Pokemon. It's just that Spiel to Walrein isn't as good as Mudkip to Swampert, but I think Walrein earns the spot pretty well. Fighting types. I think I just give this one to Medicham, just for Mega Medicham is a really neat Pokemon, as well as Pure Power is like, it's an overpowered ability, but Medicham does it really correctly just because it has a lower initial base power, and it's pretty tanky, so you could just skill swap the Pure Power onto something else. It's just like a neat Pokemon. I like him. Poison. Poison has 5 options. Okay, this is my hot take. I feel like Dustox is the most underrated Gen 3 Pokemon, and I would not be surprised if we revisited the Dustox line in the next generation, that being Wurmple and then the 2 middle evolutions and then Beautify and Dustox, because Dustox, it's just a good name, good design. It does what Venomoth really doesn't do, which is kind of be not just a moth. But Beautifly and Venomoth I've always thought are good designs. They just don't have anything that really makes them stand out. But now that we've added like a bunch of new moves and mechanics to the game, kind of like Powder, which is Vivillon's signature move, I think if you gave Dustox Powder as one of its moves that it could learn, it could get a lot of utility moves that make Dustox like kind of okay. I don't know if there's any saving Beautifly from just being a basic bug flying type, but you could try to find something. Wait, let me go over to Bug, see what Bug is looking like. Bug? Yeah, I think I'm gonna give Bug to Ninjask. I've never been a Baton Pass user, really, but you have to admit that Ninjask is like the best Baton Pass Pokemon, except for maybe EVMZ. Protect, you get a speed boost, use Swords Dance, you get another speed boost, they take you down to Sash if they don't have a move that can hit you twice. You protect again, you're now at 3 speed and 1 Swords Dance, and then you can just Baton Pass into any Pokemon you want, and it's pretty easy to sweep with that Pokemon once you get there. Just for 3 turns of hopefully your opponent doing nothing really, but Ninjask has a Pokemon he's just a ninja bug. It's just such a neat design, and I really, whenever I think of the Pokemon anime, one of the battles I think about, one of the first Pokemon battles I ever saw was Ash versus Paul, and it was Gliscor versus Ninjask at one point, and then Gliscor like uses Fire Fang. Just like an iconic anime moment for me was Ninjask just being a little bug. Okay, let's move over to Ground. Ground is, I don't know where I want to give the spots for things. I'm going to step off of Ground here for a second and go into Flying. Flying type, I think... Actually, let's just rip off a Band-Aid and let's go to Legendaries. So, in terms of Legendaries, it's not going to be Deoxys or Shadow Lugia. I mean, I've never played Coliseum. I would like to at some point, but I've never played Coliseum, so I don't really have much attachment to Shadow Lugia. I think Jirachi is a cool mythical, nothing wrong against him, he's just not the same as the Weather trio here. Same for the Regis and Latioses, or Latios and Latios, like these 3 as legendary Pokemon are just on like a different level than everybody else. Like if you wanted Pokemon that are the Ocean Pokemon, the Earth Pokemon, and the Flying Pokemon, they all 3 do their jobs like insanely well. Like, they are all forces to be reckoned with. They got cool primals and megas just because they're such rememberable Pokemon. Like, for Legendary, I know I played Alpha Sapphire. So hard to pick between Kyogre and Groudon for so many reasons each. I see myself slotting Groudon onto more teams, but I see myself in-game using Kyogre more. Just because he's cool. I think I'm going to give this spot to Groudon. Just because I use more Sun teams than I do Rain teams with Kyogre. And Kyogre's kind of more one note than Groudon. Mostly because Groudon gets a secondary typing whenever it Primal Evolves. Or Primal Reverts, not Primal Revolves. But what are we looking at in gimmick forms? Oh, right, we have a lot of gimmick forms. I'm not going to touch that yet. Is Fairy an easy race? Yeah, kinda. Mawile's cool, but Gardevoir is on a different level than Mawile. What about Steel? Ooh, Steel... Steel's a little difficult. I really like Aggron's design, and I think the Mega Evolution is cool, but I could also say the same about Metagross, and Metagross kind of gets that pseudo-legendary not being a dragon buff, so I think this one goes to Metagross. What does Rock look like? Yeah, I think Rock goes to Aggron. We're looking at for Ghost. A good number of Ghost types. Not too shabby. I think the best Ghost is probably Benetti. Mega Benetti is really neat. I think just the cursed doll aesthetic fits Benetti like really well. Like, he's not too complicated. He's just got like a creepy little zipper. He runs around. He's got whatever the heck is on the back of his head. But yeah, I mean, there's not very many ghost types in this gen, obviously, but I'll give it to Benetti. Dragon? Ooh, there's a good number of dragons this gen. I think this one just goes to Rayquaza. Rayquaza's just the penultimate dragon. Just long serpent. He's shooting hyper beams everywhere. Nobody really wants to battle him. The Mega Evolution is super cool and freaking busted, mind you. You get to hold a held item with Mega Rayquaza. Okay, now let's go back to ground, because ground I eliminated Groudon from. I think Flygon fits pretty nicely into the ground type. Flygon just overall as a concept should have gotten a Mega Evolution. Everybody knows Flygon was right on the chopping block for Megas and just barely missed the cutoff line. Like, if Game Freak was to design one more Mega Pokemon for Oraz, it would have been Flygon. Flying types. As I said before, I think Beautifly is a really good design, but it doesn't really do much to make itself different from bug and flying types. Or I put Ninjask in a spot, or I put Rayquaza in a spot. I think I'll give this one to Salamence, because Salamence was one of my first hacked Pokemon that I got back in Gen 5. I got like a 6IV level 100 green Salamence, and I always thought it was so cool that my Salamence was green and everybody else's was blue. And then whenever I transferred him up to Oraz, I just had a level 100 Mega Salamence that was super busted. So, yeah, he's still in Oraz, but Salamence is cool. I mean, if there has to be a Dragon Pseudo, I'm glad it's Salamence. Psychic? Ooh, Psychic has a good number of guys. Wait, oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know the two unknown forms got introduced in Gen 3 later on. I always thought that the original 28 unknowns just got released together, but... Huh. Who is the most masterful Psychic type? Well, it's not Gardevoir, Medicham, or Metagross. I'd say defensively as a Psychic type, I use Defense Form Deoxys more in Pokemon Go, but I use Latios more in game more often. This is a hard one. I think Deoxys has more potential to be revisited than Latios and Latios, so I'm gonna give this one to Deoxys. Defense form specifically. Now we have Dark. Who gets Dark? I think the best Pokemon to represent the Dark type out of these 10 is going to have to be... This is a hard choice. I don't even know who to cancel out. I mean, Shiftry's kind of getting canceled out. Like, he had his chances being the grass... I mean, so did Cacturne, I guess, but they had chances of being grass types, and they don't really do much, just because they're quad weak to bug, which is kind of an L. Sableye does have that Mega vibe, though, where he was also, until Fairy released, not super effectively weak to anything, which is kind of cool. But Sharpedo as a design, as a shark, like, there could be so many other shark Pokemon, but Sharpedo would be the most unique shark Pokemon, just because he's just that front part. Also, I guess Mega Sharpedo doesn't do much to differentiate itself from just normal Sharpedo. I think I'm going to give this spot to Sableye, just because Sableye is a Pokemon that, if you need it for Prankster, he's always going to be there. The Mega is pretty neat. And the design is just cool. He's just a guy who steals gems, and that keeps coming up over and over again, because it turns out a lot of Pokemon need gems to become more powerful. So, okay, back to gimmick forms. So which gimmick form does the most for the Pokemon? You could say Mega Rayquaza, just because it's such a unique Mega. Could give it to Mega Medicham, just because the design is clearly an upgrade from Medicham. Just really cool, neat idea. We talked about Mega Banette before, how that was an upgrade of Banette, which is really nice. Mega Altaria is a good one too. This is a hard choice. Okay, I'm gonna actually go with the elephant in the room here, which is Primal Kyogre. Cause if you were to talk about form changes and what the strongest water type Pokemon would be, it would just be a Pokemon that completely nullifies fire types. Like, doesn't even have to worry about its counter or the sun coming out ever again. And Primal Kyogre takes what I kind of dislike about Kyogre, where it has those little reds, like, in its design. Here, let me go over to water. See, I kind of don't like how Kyogre has this red outer shell. Like, maybe if it was, like, a lighter shade of blue, it would be better, in my opinion, at least. Primal Kyogre feels like a really deep sea monster, where it has the lighting to kind of guide its way around. If you saw this thing underwater, you would be super afraid of it, as you should be. And who is my favorite of Gen 3? This might take a couple minutes. See, when you put all these guys together, I'm not super specifically attached to any of them, really. Like, I think Gen 3 was a good generation, but there's nothing here that I would put on, like, a final team of, like, normie Pokemon. I'm hesitant to do it, but I think Groudon gets the favorite Gen 3 Pokemon slot. Just because Primal Groudon, he finally gets that fire typing, he really feels like the Lord of the Land. He just really feels like that ultimate anti-Kyogre force, as well as just being Big Lizard. Like, he's just Godzilla, but ground, and he shoots precipice rocks out of the ground, and he uses precipice blades, and precipice blades is so cool. But like, he also shoots freaking hyper beam from his mouth, and all those other things that he could do. And while I think like a lot of these other Pokemon have potential on their own, I think Groudon is just like the strongest design choice out of all the Pokemon here. Or at least feels the most compelling to me as a Pokemon. Moving on to we are not even halfway yet. Moving on to Gen 4, normal types. This one's a little tricky, just because I really like Regigigas' design. And Porygon Z, as being the final version of Porygon, is really good. He's just like a crazy corrupted duck. But a real sleeper pick in this category, I think, is Ambipom. Ambipom is a little fugly in design, honestly, when I look at it. But, like, he's just Monkey who does fumbling around things. And Ambipom is actually used specifically in, like, a couple of different kind of niche strategies. Like, just using Fake Out Last Resort and then doing a bunch of damage to the enemy with that. Or just using Fling and creating, like, that really fast, infinite flinch thing with Pickup. But I think Regigigas is probably not going to win Best Legendary of Gen 4 just because there's so many. Not that I think that devalues his stance as a normal type in general, but I think Regigigas as a normal type gets the... Well, let me think about that for a second, actually. Yeah, I'm sticking with it. Let's go with Regigigas. Alright, fire types in Gen 4. So, if I was to pick a Rotom form, it probably wouldn't be Rotom Fire. But I think Rotom Fire is a really compelling fire type. Obviously, I've already talked about how I feel about... I think Magmortar is kind of an underwhelming Magmar evolution. He's just kind of fugly, and I don't like him. Heatran might go far in the Steel type category. I don't know. But for fire types, the starters of this generation are so good. I don't know who to pick out of that. But in terms of fire types, I think Infernape gets the slot. Let me go over to starter here. So, I've never played through Gen 4 on like an actual Gen 4 run through. But if I was to pick a starter for Gen 4, I feel like I would pick Torterra. Just because the turtle that had the world on its back is such a neat concept for me. And I think Gen 4 has the best starter trio, like, for final evolutions that fit together, that feel like they fit together with each other. Gen 4's designs, like, are all pretty equal, but if I was to pick one, I think it would be Torterra. Going over to water, feels weird seeing Palkia here, even though he's a water type. But going over to water, it's a close fight between Empoleon and Gastrodon for me. Or this might be the first category where I pick a non-fully evolved Pokemon and I go with Weasel. Nothing wrong with Floatzel, by all means. Floatzel is a cool evolution of Weasel. But Weasel as like an anime Pokemon and Pokemon that I just knew about very early on, it's just kind of iconic for me. But I think I'm gonna give water to... Can I look at ground? Does ground make this any easier? It doesn't. Ground is actually going to be a bit of a struggle for me to pick. Water is going to go to Empoleon. Just because I think as a water type, it embodies more of a cooler idea than Gastrodon. Because Gastrodon is a sea slug, and while I don't think it does that design terribly, it does just do it at a basic level, where Empoleon being a penguin, as like a final evolution of a penguin, it does it really well. Moving into grass types, let's go Shaman, honest. Shaman Sky form, I think it's just really neat mythical Pokemon. I think a close runner-up is Roserade, just because of how much of an improvement Roserade is over Roselia. But like as a mythical Pokemon, Shaman switching between its little cute hedgehog form and its cute sky form for that one move. I mean, I go to the anime a lot for Gen 4, it's because one of my favorite times in the anime was the Gen 4 anime and movies. But yeah, I think they did a good job with Shaman and Shaman Sky form. More than they did a good job with Roselia and evolving into Roserade. Up next we have electric types, which is not an easy race. Well actually, I guess you throw all the Rotoms in here, and me just picking base Rotom means that I like all the Rotoms more than whoever I pick. But Luxray and Electivire and Magnezone are all in this group, which makes it hard. I'm thinking a lot about Steel types. What actually is involved in Steel this generation? A good number of Pokemon. Okay, forgive me for asking another question, but what all is involved in fighting this generation? Okay, what is all involved in Psychic this generation? Okay, I think I know my answer. We're going to give Psychic to Gallade. But that's only... Gallade is the best Psychic type in my opinion, and Mega Gallade is really cool. I also kind of got that Gardevoir vibes, you know what I mean. But picking Gallade for Psychic type means that I can pick Lucario for Fighting type, kind of by default, and I think Lucario is another really neat Pokemon, another really cool Mega Evolution. I mean, Lucario's Mega Evolution might win Best Gimmick Form for this gen, but Lucario just as an Aura Pokemon is really neat. Okay, and picking Lucario here, did that make another choice easier? Yeah, it took him out of Steel. So we don't have Empoleon and Lucario in Steel. So I think the battle right now is between Heatran and Magnezone for Steel. And the Pokemon that I like more as a Steel type, I think the Pokemon that I like more as a Steel type is Magnezone. Just because Magnezone has that history of Magneton not having an evolution for such a long time, and I'm sure the development team, while creating Magneton, were kind of struggling with the idea, but the fact that they took Magnemite to Magneton to Magnezone versus, like, I feel like there could have been a lot of really easy outs for Magnezone's design, just like making a Magneton but with bigger magnets, or making him with 5 magnets or something dumb like that. I think Magnezone is a good final form of Magnemite. Whereas you compare to Heatran, who is a legendary that I do like, but I've never really used that much. Like, I think Heatran is a very good defensive competitive Pokemon with, like, Flash Fire. With Eruption, he just kind of goes crazy. But in terms of, like, Steel-type design, I think Magnezone has that history going for it, which just puts it a little bit above Heatran. What's Fairy? Oh, Fairy's just Togekiss. Moving into Ghost? Is Ghost easy? Ghost is kind of hard. Again, if I pick Rotom, I'd put all the Rotom forms behind Rotom. But Rotom and Spiritomb and Garantina are quite the trio to pick from. I'd have to say Garantina is like my favorite third legendary Pokemon, just because it's so different from the other two being Dialga and Palkia. Or it kind of gives Dialga and Palkia more reason for existing, because while space and time is kind of like all-encompassing, the fact that they made a Pokemon based around antimatter, or at least like kind of the evil version. I mean, Giratina is not necessarily evil. It's just kind of like weirdly lawful neutral or whatever. I don't know what Garantina's Lion chart is really. But in terms of third legendarying, I think Giratina does it the best. Another thing about it that kind of wipes away. I mean, Spiritom's a neat idea where it's just all the souls locked into the one rock and then has the face coming out. But I feel like that pales in comparison to the power that Giratina gives off as the third legendary. So Giratina can take the ghost type slot, but I also think Giratina isn't the best legendary to come out of Gen 4. So I can put Giratina and Ghost pretty safely. Okay, was all of that really just out of me thinking about electric types? I think so. So I gave it to Magnezone, so it's not going to be an electric type. It's really going to be between Electivire and Rotom. Because while I like the Shinx line, I think Luxray doesn't do enough to differentiate itself as an electric type Pokemon, even though it has like fairly good abilities, that being Guts and Intimidate, I think? Yeah, it has like good abilities, but its move pool just doesn't really do much for it. And while some people think that Luxray should be a dark type because it does things in the night sometimes, I don't think that fits Luxray super well either. Maybe a Mega Evolution could be electric dark, but I think base Luxray should just be an electric type. I don't know how you would make Luxray stand out more from other Pokemon. Maybe a signature move or something like that, or a Mega Evolution or an alternate form somewhere down the line. But when you compare Luxray to the raw power that is Electivire, going from Electabuzz to that final evolution, Electivire might be my favorite Gen 4 kind of final evolution that they introduced. Just because you have Electabuzz, who's like the electric punching Pokemon, and then you have the Electivire Pokemon, and then you have Electivire, who is the electric I'm going to punch the crap out of you and then electrocute you Pokemon. Like, this thing is fierce. It's a really cool design. I like Electivire a lot. But I also like Rotom's gimmick a lot, where Rotom can change into all these different forms. I feel like it has a lot of potential. I kind of wish that there were more Rotom forms. Like, I think they could introduce more Rotom forms at some point in the future. I think that potential has a lot of viability for me liking Rotom. You can always see yourself slapping Rotom onto a Pokemon team. Like, it's a good competitive Pokemon compared to Electivire, who doesn't necessarily do a lot. But if I was to give this to an electric type, I think it would be Electivire. Because Electivire is more... the electric typing has more to do with it going from Electabuzz to Electivire, rather than Rotom's gimmick has to do with it being... I mean, it's an electrical appliance, but like... Well, I guess it is, actually. Hold on. You know what? I think I'm just gonna stick with it. I think I'm just gonna keep Electivire in this slot. Ice types. Ice... See... Actually, no. Did I give something to Ground yet? Ground was gonna be a hard one, right? Yeah, Ground is hard. I think Ice is gonna go to Mamoswine to make the Ground type choice a little bit easier, but also Mamoswine's he's just Mammoth, which is from the Ice Age. He's just like a good representation of what I like about Ice. I think Mamoswine just stands out as an Ice type Pokemon, where he's got that good Ice Ground typing for good offensive coverage, as well as he gets like Stealth Rocks, like he's decently fast. Like Mamoswine's just a good Pokemon all around. Poison. Is poison... Poison's kind of difficult, actually. Like, we've already talked about Rose Raid, but Drapion and Skuntank... Drapion isn't more of an anime thing, really. When, again, the Ash versus Paul fight that ends on Gliscor and Drapion using, like, Pin Missile, and Gliscor's flying through the Pin Missiles. Even though, now that I think about it, Pin Missile wouldn't actually damage Gliscor that much because it's a flying type. But the poison type that I see myself gravitating towards the most here, I feel like is Skuntank. Just because he's a funky skunk Pokemon. Like, he gets a flamethrower. Like, if you were to ask me to design a skunk Pokemon, I think I would want it to look exactly like Skuntank. Flying. Staraptor. I think Staraptor is the second best designed bird behind Talonflame. Regional. You know what, let's go down to Regional Bird. let's look at all the regional bird Pokemon here. I think the best regional bird Pokemon is Fletchling, just because whenever it gets to Talonflame, it feels the most distinct, and also Talonflame is one of my favorite flying types. But looking at final evolved flying type Pokemon coming out of Gen 4, it is either between Staraptor or Gliscor, and I don't want to pick Gliscor for this spot just so it makes ground type easier, because I think Gliscor has a good chance of winning ground type. But if I was to give a Pokemon in this category flying type based solely on the merit of being a flying type, I think it would have to go to Staraptor. Staraptor is just such a strong, hard-hitting, it's like the best Pokemon to use Brave Bird in my opinion if you want physical damage. I mean, I guess Talonflame also gets Brave Bird for the Gale Wings priority, but like I think I most associate the move Brave Bird with Staraptor, whereas there's not really a flying type move that I associate with Gliscor. Also, honorable mention is Honchkrow, just because I think Honchkrow is a neat evolution of Murkrow. It's just too bad Honchkrow doesn't get Prankster, but also it might be kind of strong if it got Prankster. So what are you gonna do? Bugs? Bugs get Yanmega. Yanmega, I guess actually I should have brought up during flying types, but Yanmega pretty safely gets the bug type spot just because Yanmega as an evolution of Yanma is really good. And I think Yanmega is another one of those Pokemon that's not necessarily as close to Flygon was to getting a Mega Evolution, but if there's like a level underneath Flygon, Yanmega was definitely right there. Also, Yanma and Yanmega for the longest time were the only Pokemon who started with Y in their names, which I think is kind of neat. Okay, moving on to rocks. Like, Rampardos is cool, don't get me wrong, but he is frail and slow as all heck, and like, he's a neat Pokemon idea in the sense that he just has a really high attack stat and then breaks through things, kind of like Staraptor is, but at least Staraptor has the speed, where this thing has a poor defensive typing, and it's just a one-trick horse. Versus Rhyperior, who is a very, very good upgrade of Rhydon, in my opinion. Like, I think when it comes to rock types, like, if Rhyperior was in Gen 9, it would be a really strong terrestrial Pokemon, just because of, like, Terra Water, having Lightning Rod, having Rock and Ground as a really good offensive types. Like, I thought about this earlier in the day, but there's no Rock Ground types in Gen 9 yet. And I think that they did that purposefully, just because Rock Ground, while not being a great defensive type by any means, is a really good offensive type. So if you had Rhyperior with Rock, Ground, and Water coverage, it would just be unstoppable. Except maybe by Grass still. You'd still need a Pokemon to help this thing beat Grass. But actually, maybe you pick Steel then in that case, but Rhyperior is also a really common Dynamax Pokemon, just because you could, like, Weakness Policy, and then get this thing sweeping everything else on the opponent team. But yeah, I really like the direction that the design Rhyperior took from Rhydon, as well as he's also just a really strong Pokemon in general. Dragons. I think I just give this one to Garchomp. Like, in terms of pseudo-dragons, I know I was talking about Salamence earlier, but Garchomp as a pseudo-dragon also does its job really well. Just the land shark vibes that he gives off, using an Earthquake. You know, Cynthia's Garchomp is one of the most feared Pokemon in all of, like, just casual playthroughs, and for a good reason. Just because it's a really strong Pokemon. And he kind of goes back and forth in the meta. Like, he was pretty good during the start of Gen 9, but then he kind of fell off when Iron Bundle was introduced, just because Iron Bundle eats Garchomp for breakfast. And like, you occasionally see Garchomp getting play, and the Mega isn't great, but I think Garchomp, like, as a dragon pseudo design is really good. Dark? Who is the most evil of the bunch? I think it's gonna be between Spiritomb and Darkrai for Dark. Like, I really like Darkrai's mythical design, and that he's like the sleep Pokemon. He gives people nightmares, but he's not necessarily trying to do that. He's just like a necessary evil Pokemon with Cresselia. Cresselia is like the counter to Darkrai. When you're talking about like forms like Mega Evolution or Gigantamax, I'm always thinking about Spiritomb just breaking that rock open and going ham on people with its powered up form. But again, maybe I only really think about Spiritomb just because of the potential that I could have when that rock bust open. Whereas with Darkrai, I like Darkrai as like a whole design, like all the time. He's just a sleepy guy. He just puts you to sleep. Dark Void. So I think I'm gonna give this one to Darkrai. He just puts you to sleep and then gives you nightmares, which is just a neat idea. So now we go back to ground, which was previously one of my more difficult decisions, and we've taken out Torterra, Garchomp, and Rhyperior, and Mamoswine. So for ground, we have really all of the final evolution. Hippowdon, Gliscor, and Gastrodon are all good in their own rights at being Pokemon. Like, seriously. But if I was to pick a Pokemon based on the fact that it is a ground type, I really do think I'm going to pick Gliscor. Just because Gliscor is such a neat evolution of Gligar. It takes like an idea that was okay and I think perfects it. And I can't quite remember who I was saying before is like the best Gen 4 evolution. It might have been Electivire I was talking about before. But I think Gliscor is a really good runner-up, if not tie with Electivire for one of my Gen 4 evolutions. Okay, and all that leaves is Gimmick form, which is, just these 5 guys. So I think the Gimmick form that does the most for the Pokemon is Mega Lopunny, just because it gets that fighting typing. You get the ability to fake out ghost types. You can also hit really hard with return, fighting type moves. Like, that's all the coverage that Lopunny really needs, and a lot of single players do just pick Mega Lopunny just because of how strong it is. As compared to these other, Garchomp Mega Evolved is kind of like a negative. And while Lucario and Gallade are both really neat Megas, as well as Mega Abomasnow really doesn't do much for it, other than kind of similar to what Tyranitar does, where it just gets to set the weather again. I think Mega Lopunny is just that much more above Lopunny that really sets it for me. Alright, favorite Gen 4 Legendary. I have been having to think about this the entire time. I've already checked off Giratina and Regigigas because they're cool guys, and Darkrai, and Shaman. And I don't want to give it to the Lake Trio, because while I like the Lake Trio's ideas, I think there's not much to differentiate them from each other. Kind of going into Fion and Manaphy, while Manaphy being a water type with Tail Glow kind of goes crazy. It's not super crazy. Cresselia, you're bulky as heck, and I try to use you sometimes, and I fail you like every time, just because Cresselia is not my playstyle more often than not. So I think I'm going to give this one to Dialga, just because I do see myself using Dialga. I had that Electrify video a while ago where I used Groudon and Dialga as my 2 legendary Pokemon, my 2 box legendary Pokemon. I think that's for good reason, just because Dialga as a steel dragon that can control time is just nutty. I even have a Dialga plushie. Well, I have both Dialga and Palkia as plushies, but because they kind of go together. And I don't necessarily hate Arceus's design, but I kind of wish that Arceus had like that final omnipotent form in Pokemon Legends Arceus. But yeah, we'll slot Dialga for best legendary. Favorite Gen 4 Pokemon is a hard one, because all these guys are really good. All these Pokemon are really well designed Pokemon in their own rights. Like, that cannot be denied. Like seriously, man. You got a lot of good guys here. Okay, so I've done some thinking, and I've picked the best Pokemon from each of the rows here. I wasn't really considering any of the 3 Pokemon at the bottom for my favorite Gen 4 Pokemon. And my favorite one from row 1 is Mamoswine. Going back to the evolution from Piloswine to Mamoswine is really good. He's just a big, chunky, fuzzy guy, and I really like what he brings to the table in terms of being an ice type. It's kind of like prehistoric, but also tough guy. And then going into the second row, we have Gliscor, who, again, going from Gligar to Gliscor is such an improvement, and he's also got kind of that toxic stall, sort of stay on the field forever, super defense tanky Pokemon that you can really do a lot with. He had that strong spot on Ash's team in the anime, and overall just a really versatile design. And then in the last row we have Garchomp being Maybe my favorite I don't want to say that, because there's a good number of them, but Garchomp as just like a tough Pokemon does a lot with its ground and dragon typing. It's a real shame it pushed out Flygon immediately one gen after Flygon, but if I had to pick between Mamoswine, Gliscor, and Garchomp, who I would most want on a Pokemon team, I think it would have to be... I've literally sat here for another minute just thinking about this. I think it had to be Gliscor. I think Gliscor is the most underrated of the Gen 4 Pokemon, and he's not in the current Gen 9, and I don't think he made a super big appearance in Gen 8 either, or 7. I don't think we've had a good Gliscor revisit in a while, but I think Gliscor is a really underrated design in terms of like being a bat, but he's got a cool tail. He has a really overwhelming presence that I'm sure Garchomp has. I mean, Mamoswine doesn't really have an overwhelming presence, but he has that overwhelming presence that Garchomp has, and he has that cool kind of design upgrade that Mamoswine had. So I think I'm going to give my favorite gen for Pokemon to Gliscor. Alright, this might be the hardest generation for me to pick out favorites. But we're moving on to Gen 5. And Gen 5, starting off with normal types, which you think would be an easy pick. But this is a little difficult. So we got Stoutland and Unpheasant. Well, maybe I'll not consider Unpheasant because Unpheasant will go into flying types later. But I don't want that to hurt Unpheasant's chances of getting picked at all. Because while Unpheasant, as a bird, doesn't do much to stand out, I really like the male Unpheasant design. And how different it is from the female design. Like, the gender difference between these two is insane. But then you also have Deerling and the Seasons gimmick, and I really like this gimmick, where it has different forms based on what season it is. But then you also got Bouffalant, and Bouffalant is a buffalo that charges into people and doesn't apologize. Then you got Braviary, and Braviary is a big eagle who crashes into people and doesn't apologize, and also a sheer force user, which makes it pretty neat in my book. But then you also have Meloetta, and Meloetta's got these two forms, and I think make it a really neat Pokemon. I mean, it's like a performance Pokemon. How neat of an idea is that? But in terms of who can be the best normal type coming out of this generation, or who best embodies the normal typing, I don't think... Well, what does Grass look like? Grass is kind of hard, because we got Serperior. You know what? I mean, Starter isn't really ripping off a bandage, because it's Emboar. It's always going to be Emboar. Sorry, Samurott and Serperior, I really like those guys too. And they are like my second favorite trio of starters, just behind Gen 4. But, I mean, Emboar is my first final Pokemon evolution. Tepig was my first starter Pokemon ever. So Emboar is always going to have the place in my heart, being that level 74 Emboar in the Elite Four, crushing through everything. He's just a cool guy, you know? I like Emboar a lot. Maybe I should just pick something random. What about Poison? Okay, Poison's not that complicated. Yeah, we just have Scolipede, Garbodor, and Amoonguss. So, as a poison type, I think everybody trashes on Trubbish for being a little trash bag. But I think if I wanted a trash Pokemon, it would look like Trubbish. I mean, just saying. But Garbodor, he's a little too much. Like, if we're gonna take this trash concept further, he's a little bit too much. So I don't think I would give poison typing to Garbodor, even though he is kind of useful sometimes. Amoonguss is obviously the most competitively viable of, like, the poison types here, by, like, a long shot. But Scolipede, as an evolutionary line, I think I like a little bit more than Amoonguss. I mean, I like using Amoonguss, but I also hate having Amoonguss used against me, especially when I'm running things that can't really deal with redirection or sleep. Those two really kind of cancel each other out. So I think I'm going to put Scolipede in poison types. Scolipede, as a big bug that just runs around, he gets the check mark for poison types. Let's go electric. Is a hard. Oh, well, actually, no, this is Galvantula, duh. Wait, actually, can we put Galvantula on Bug? Oh, Bug. Bug could be Volcarona or Genesect. See, I knew this was going to be the hardest gen for me to pick anything at all. Obviously, Galvantula's got to get a spot somewhere, being an electric or Bug. I just don't know what spot it should get, because I quite like Zekrom and Thundurus as electric-type legendary Pokemon. And Electros is also up there. He's pretty good. But in terms of what... I guess it is more based on Galvantula. In terms of what Galvantula does for the bug typing, I feel like Galvantula gets the bug typing. Versus... in a battle between Thundurus and Zekrom for electric typing, I think I'd give this more to Thundurus. And Thundurus kind of goes both forms either way. While Zekrom is always going to be my first legendary Pokemon, Thundurus is like my second one, and Thundurus is pretty neat. Like, let's be honest here. And he's kind of got those Kyogre vibes where he's just the controller of storms and he doesn't care. Or Kyogre and Lugia vibes. Okay, so maybe that made some other choices a little bit easier, because when I look at fire types, you got Darmanitan, you have Volcarona, and you have Chandelure. Actually, what are we looking like in ghost types? Ghost types... yeah, I think I would give Chandelure ghost type. Like, I think Frillish and Jellicent are cool Pokemon, but they don't really do much competitively other than just sit there and be tanky. Kind of same, actually not the same, with Golurk and Golett. Golurk is a neat idea, because he's got that punch with Iron Fist into having Shadow Punch. But Shadow Punch kinda sucks. And I feel like Golurk has a lot of potential in the future for, like, regional variants. But if we're just going to stay at Gen 5 for now, I think Chandelure is, like, the Pokemon that I would most want to receive, like, a Mega Evolution or a regional form. Also, Cofagrigus is worth... I think Cofagrigus is cool. Like, I mean, I guess I could say that about, like, all the Gen 5 Pokemon, because Gen 5 is my favorite gen. But Chandelure is, like, the penultimate Gen 5 Ghost type. Okay, so did that make Fire type a little bit? Yeah, now it's just between Darmanitan and Volcarona. And Volcarona definitely can't go in Bug. So I'm going to put Volcarona here. Even though that pushes out Darmanitan. Darmanitan, Sheer Force user, love the guy a lot. He's really neat. But he kind of pales in comparison to Volcarona for competitiveness. Where Volcarona might be quad weak to Rock. It gets Quiver Dance, it gets Will-O-Wisp, it gets Fiery Dance. It gets Giga Drain. It's just a really good tanky Pokemon that I think will be around for a very long time. And it has that kind of stat. I haven't talked about this a lot, really. But there's some Pokemon that, like, could almost be at legendary status. And Volcarona is very close to that. Like, as a kid, getting that Larvesta egg in that one spot and then training it all the way up into a Volcarona was so worth it for me. And such a neat experience. Emboar would be the ultimate fire type if there wasn't a starter slot. But yeah, we'll put Volcarona there. Okay, let's go back to normal type. Because I haven't given anything to grass yet. But I don't think I would want Sawsbuck or Deerling to be the ultimate normal or grass type either way. Just because without the gimmick, they don't really stand out very much. Yeah, I think for normal type, I am going to give this to Meloetta. Because Meloetta as a mythical, I've never really obtained a Meloetta. Like, I never got one in Gen 5. And I can't think of an event where I would have gotten one. But Meloetta as a Pokemon, as a mythical Pokemon, where it can change forms between this kind of concert performance form and then like a faster, higher tempo dancing form. It's just a neat idea. And while I don't have like that playthrough attachment that I might have with some of these other Pokemon, I think it's just the best normal type design out of any of these guys here. And I think, like, if anything, the normal typing doesn't do enough for Meloetta as Meloetta's like maximum potential could be. Okay, water. Samurott is definitely one of the front runners, I think, for water, but I also really like Keldeo as like that fourth sword of justice. The Keldeo movie was obviously very inspirational as a kid, but I think Samurott has always kind of had that cool vibe about him, so I think I'm gonna give this one to Samurott. Alright, well now I'm gonna feel kind of bad if I don't give Grass to Superior, but Ferrothorn is right. What's Steel looking like? Steel has Excadrill. Yeah, I might just have to give this one immediately to Excadrill. Excadrill is such a cool Pokemon. Sandrush, Moldbreaker, both really good abilities. He's just like a really good defining Pokemon to have like Steel Ground, and I say this sometimes about Gen 5, but a lot of Gen 5 ideas are based on Gen 1 Pokemon. Kind of being Excadrill is sort of based on Sandshrew, and I think Excadrill does the best to, well, maybe not does the best to differentiate itself as its own Pokemon, but the idea of just like a mole that's a metal drill and he folds into a drill, it's just neat. I just like him, I just like his design a lot. Okay, but now we go back to Grass. And it's either between Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn didn't make the Steel type cut, and I feel bad for him at that. But Superior, I am more likely to pick up than Ferrothorn, just because Superior is more my playstyle, where I like to get off a Leaf Storm and then obliterate everybody with Contrary. So I haven't seen Superior in a while, but I really do like what Superior has to offer in Dragon Pulse, Leaf Storm, gets Nature Power, which is super fun. Back in Gen 7, I would learn a lot of Normalium Z Superior with Leaf Storm, Giga Drain, Nature Power, and Glare. Because if you had Normalium Z, you could get a special defense buff with Glare and then outspeed the opponent, so that it was easier to start building up Leaf Storms. Or you could see Nature Power, and then in doubles, I would bring in like a terrain Pokemon. Well, I guess that was only the top is at that time. But you could bring in a terrain Pokemon, and then the Z Nature Power would change into an electric type move. Whenever I had the Leaf Storm off, it means that I was using a +2 electric type move, and it would be pretty unexpected. So yeah, I think I just have a lot more attachment to Superior as a Pokemon than Ferrothorn, even though Ferrothorn might be a little bit more singles viable, just because of how easy it is to stall with Ferrothorn. I think in terms of grass type, I would just give it to Superior. Ice typing. This is kind of, it's a bit of a task here to ask me to choose between Kyurem and Beartic. I like Beartic's design a lot, even though competitively it doesn't do very much. And I like Kyurem's design. It's kind of like the unfused husk of the original dragon, where it can become Kyurem White or Kyurem Black. You know, first like fusion Pokemon, if you don't really count Slowbro just being an evolution. Kyurem as like that first fusion Pokemon also has like Pokemon Legends Kyurem potential for a future Legends Arceus. Kind of next in that sort of game line. I think Kyurem is such an interesting concept. I can't wait to see what they do with the original dragon. You know, now that I've said all that out loud, I think Kyurem really does just crush Beartic here. Yeah, we'll put Kyurem in the slot. Fighting types. Fighting type Pokemon. See, I know Sock and Throw are kind of like, they're supposed to be Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan. Just kind of worse. But like, Sock and Throw are just kind of funny. Like, they kind of do a little bit to stand out from each other. Like, Sock is sturdy and Endeavor and kind of that funny jank. But Throw is like Mat Block, Circle Throw, Storm Throw, just weird fighting type moves that like only it gets. But like, if you were to ask me to pick a fighting type that I would want to use out of all these fighting types that are here, I think it would be between either Conkeldurr for that, you know, Flame Orb gut strategy into Mach Punching and Drain Punching and Ice Punching and destroying everything with super tanky but hits like a truck Conkeldurr, or it would be Keldeo, just because Keldeo is a really neat water fighting type mythical Pokemon. I used to like Terrakion a lot. Terrakion used to be my favorite of the Swords of Justice, but as time has gone on, I've grown less fond of Terrakion just because I feel like he does less as a Pokemon competitively. And it's not that I dislike the Swords of Justices. It's just that as time has gone on, there's been much less need for them, which is kind of too bad, but just kind of how things are. But if I was given the opportunity to have either one of either Conkeldurr or Keldeo, I think I would pick Keldeo more often than not. Actually, even this form of Keldeo. Because Keldeo's just neat. I like it. He's just Water Horse. Keldeo as a fighting type Pokemon. I think, like, the Swords of Justice idea, where it's all these guys just protecting the region with the swords on their heads. I think that concept wins over Conkeldurr, who is just big guy with stone pillars as a concept, so we'll put Keldeo on fighting types. Going over to ground. Oh, jeez, you're really killing me here. I mean, we've already given Excadrill a spot, and I quite like Crocodile. But Lando T is right there, and I like Lando T a lot. Lando T gets a lot of crap. What's Flying type looking like? Yeah, Flying type's pretty full. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm actually going to make Thundurus the Flying type choice. I'm going to make Lando T the Ground type choice. And then I'm going to make Thundurus the electric type choice. A little shuffling around here. Right, I talked about Zekrom and how much I like Zekrom as just that first legendary slot. But Landorus has been a legendary that just sticks around through all the generations, mostly because of its unique typing and its utility and what it is able to do. But like Landorus as a legendary Pokemon fits really well with like the entire theme that it's been based around, where it's kind of like Thundurus and Tornadus are the storm before the harvest comes in, and Landorus is like that controlling force between the two chaoses. Of course, that's been changed a little bit with Enamorus. Now they're more like the seasons, which still kind of works, is that Landorus prepares you for the winter after the bountiful summer, and that Enamorus is kind of that in-between season of bliss between not being in the cold and not being in the storm. But the way that you unlock Landorus is by having both Thundurus and Tornadus in the party. So playing through Gen 5 as a kid, finally getting a Tornadus from some guy that I traded like a level 1 Chimchar, I think. Having like that level 80 secret boss was such a neat experience to witness. Trying to finally catch that like last legendary Pokemon in my game that I always wanted to get. And both forms of Landorus are pretty good in their own right, because, again, Landorus is a Sheer Force user whenever it's in Incarnate form, and Earth Power, Life Orb, Sheer Force goes pretty hard. Like, not even gonna lie. Actually, wait, can I go over to Dark type right now and give that? Oh, no, I can't. Because Zoroark exists, and I think Zoroark is going to get the Dark type spot. Yeah, I think he gets the Dark type spot. Not because I dislike Hydreigon, but I think Hydreigon has a pretty good chance of winning Dragon type for this generation. And I think I just like Zoroark more than I like Crocodile. Just because the ability is so neat. He's the illusion Pokemon. He'll mess with you. He was cool. He got his own movie in Gen 4, which made him like one of the first Gen 5 Pokemon to be revealed. Yeah, I just like Zoroark's concept a lot. Speaking of dragons, can we do dragon right now? I mean, we have all the legendary dragons here, but Zekrom and Kyurem, they've got their own spots to shine. Kind of pains me to do this to Haxorus, but I think I am going to pick Hydreigon. So, Haxorus, you don't do anything wrong, bud, but you don't necessarily do anything right either. Like, Haxorus is a really cool design, good. I really like the Axew to Haxorus evolutionary line, and having a Fracture as a kid for as long as I did, getting a Haxorus was so neat in the game, but Haxorus doesn't do much to differentiate itself from other dragons. Like, Haxorus gets Mold Breaker, but when you look at Hydreigon and what Hydreigon does in Gen 9 compared to Haxorus, it's just leagues above Haxorus. Like, you can Terra Steel, Terra Fire, Terra Poison, it puts off a lot of pressure. You could, like, Focus Energy, Draco Meteor, so that the stat drops didn't matter, and you could be Dondozo that way. Like Hydreigon just had a lot of utility, and even before Fairy types were introduced, Hydreigon had a lot of power in Gen 5, as well as just being a really cool Hydra design as well. Like, I know I was saying that I didn't like the fact that a lot of the pseudos are dragons, but when you look at Garchomp, Salamence, and Hydreigon, like they're just cool designs that are worth being pseudo legendary Pokemon. Okay, moving into rocks. Rocks, I think I can pretty. It's either between Gigalith or Terrakion. I've already given my piece on Terrakion, but as a rock type, I think I like Gigalith a little bit more. Just because I end up using him more often in my playthroughs. I don't really have that playthrough attachment like I do with... Terrakion doesn't have that playthrough attachment like I do with Gigalith. Okay, Psychic. Why did I skip Psychic? I feel like Psychic should be a pretty easy one. It's like kinda easy. I mean, I already picked Meloetta for normal, so I think I'm gonna put Victini in Psychic. Mushark is great, it just doesn't do much really. Like, I like the idea that it's the dream Pokemon who's kind of gives off whatever this dream fluid is, but I think it needs like one more evolution before I can really say that I like the Munna line. Kind of same with Swoobat. Whenever it goes, it's the Zubat equivalent, and Swoobat while having Simple and Calm Mind, which goes kind of nutty. Like, I could see myself putting a Swoobat on my team during like the second or third run through of Pokemon Black and White, and if we weren't including like mythicals in the psychic type category, I think it would probably be a good fight between Swoobat and Ranunculus. But because Victini is here, I think I'm going to pick Victini. Just a solid mythical Pokemon again, kind of like Meloetta. I think Victini is just like a neat design. Okay, and last but not least, it's Fairy, which is just going to be Whimsicott. I mean, Whimsicott, I don't know what other Fairy types Gen 5 could make, but I do have a bit of attachment to Whimsicott just for that Prankster Tailwind and Prankster Nature Power, which is, I mean, I talked about Nature Power earlier with Superior, but it's just funny. Just cool Pokemon. Gets the check mark. Best gimmick form is either Mega Audino or Gigantamax Garbodor. See, I dislike Mega Audino because I feel like Mega Audino should just be a normal evolution of Audino. But we're never going to get it just because Mega Audino exists, and they probably don't want to give evolutions to Mega Pokemon. I think that's another reason why they just don't make Mega Pokemon anymore, is because they don't want to shut down the idea of a Pokemon just having an evolution. But, you know, fingers crossed that Mega Evolution comes back around for the Gen 5 remix. But in terms of gimmick form, I think by default that just gives it to Gigantamax Garbodor, who, if you ask me what its secondary effect was, I cannot tell you for the life of me. But, like, it's probably pretty good. I mean, I guess he does have, like, the boat inside of him, which is kind of funny. Favorite Gen 5 legendary Pokemon? Oh, God, I never thought this day was going to come. I mean, I've already given out a lot of awards to everybody else. I gave it out to Thundurus, Keldeo, Zekrom, Kyurem, Meloetta, Victini. I really don't want to shuffle around what I've already put down. But actually, I think I'm going to shuffle around what I already put down. I think Landorus gets the best legendary of Gen 5 award. And then let's go back to ground and let's make this Crocodile. Crocodile, you do get the award just because Landorus gets the best legendary from Gen 5 award. But, I mean, Crocodile's cool. He should get knockoff again. Like, I like Anger Point into Power Trip. Like, I think it's a funny combination. And I think Ash's Crocodile is one of my favorite Pokemon that Ash has ever owned, just because he always had the glasses. And Sandile is just, Sandile to Crocorock to Crocodile is one of the best naming schemes. But also, like, just a good evolutionary line. Just a solid Gen 5 evolutionary line. My favorite Gen 5 Pokemon. It should not be a hard decision, because my favorite Pokemon is in here. And my favorite Pokemon of all time is kind of a tie, actually. Is Galvantula and Emboar. But I always say that it's Galvantula because Emboar gets kind of the bias of being my first Pokemon ever. And I really like just like Emboar's design. But my favorite Pokemon out of any Pokemon is Galvantula. Galvantula just has... I have a Galvantula plush. Well, I actually also have an Emboar plush. But my Galvantula plush is one of my favorite plushes. He's just a little guy. Galvantula just adds so much to any team that you put it on. Like, it's an electric bug-type offensive Pokemon. It's pretty fast, but also you can set up webs if your opponent isn't looking to KO you that turn. So you could put on a Focus Sash, get your turn off, of either using Thunder Wave into Thunder with compound eyes, increasing its accuracy, always landing those Thunder Waves to paralyze your opponent. Just really good speed control from Galvantula as a Pokemon. And he doesn't get a lot of play outside of singles, but like, you could use him in doubles. You could. Like, I think he would be alright. But, like, as a design, he's the electric spider Pokemon. Like, he's the spider Pokemon in my head. And while I don't necessarily like spiders, I think, like, it's just a cool animal. Like, if I was to pick a Pokemon to have in real life, it would be Galvantula. Just because he would be electric to pay my electricity bill. But also, I could swing around places on Galvantula's back like Spider-Man. And, you know, he would take me places super quickly. So, yeah, that's all Gen 5. What are we looking at so far here? I might take a break after this. But this is quite a list. This is quite a list. Alright, so this is me post-editing Gens 1 through 5. I did decide to take a break after this, but I also think it's good to divide the video into 2 parts, so that way it's not all just one big thing, and it gives me time to edit the second part. So that is going to be it for this video. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video, and even consider subscribing, because both of those things help me out an absolute ton. As you can tell, the editing process does take a while because I tend to just talk and talk and talk, and that's not great for editing, but well, I'll get through it. So I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.